Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're doing chapter 2 of book 2, which and it's dealing with the question of Plato's Republic and Aristotle's critique of Plato's view. He starts out with we ended last chapter with him raising the question of whether it's possible to share, should the citizens share in everything or nothing, or some more than others, and then he discloses that sharing in nothing is possible since that there is the city, the purpose of the city, or even the current regime, is a sharing of people in a certain place, a sharing, something that they share in common. But the question is, what do they share in common, and how much do they share in common? And therefore, this is a question whether it's based on law described in whether the question ends with a question: is it better that they exist now, or should we follow the law that's suggested in Plato's Republic? And that's a sub question. And the question then becomes opens the whole investigation of what's happening now. Again, there's a disconnect. Traditionally, we will understand book 2 is, well, it's about first the theory, the best regime in theory, then the best regimes that are held into account, and then um, uh, uh, the best regime in a discussion that wraps it up on some laws and statesmanship, right? That weird structure. This is the structure of how it appears. But the text itself suggested something else. That was going to be everything was going to be. The text introduces itself as a discussion about the regimes that are finally done and which ones are, and learn from them. Those are regimes that are prayed for. Who are there's opinions. It's about the opinions about the regimes that are prayed for, and about we think about the cities that are finally administered. Um, which will be the three cities that we will look at in the middle later chapters, right? The Sparta, Crete, and Carthage, right? These will be the cities that are held to believe this. But instead, what we get now is a discussion of Plato, okay? And we'll get a discussion of Plato in the Republic for a couple chapters. And this is, we're going to turn to that first thing. And we address the first question he lists: whether should children be women be held in common? Now, this is the comment. Having women common to all involves many difficulties. But a particular difficulty is that the reason Socrates gives as to why there should be legislation of this sort does not result from his arguments. So, in other words, there's a disconnect between what Socrates argues and the necessity for why Socrates is arguing this. Does not result from. He doesn't give a real reason for why this is necessary. Further, with respect to the end which he asserts the city should have, that is, as we've just said, impossible. That has been just said. But in other words, with respect to the end in which he asserts the city should have, as it says, as we have just said, it's said impossible. In other words, that women should be held in common because it's much difficult, much problems with it. Um, but how one should distinguish a sense in which it is possible is not discussed. Okay. Okay. In other words, that the city. Actually, this is the famous line that what happens is the even the city that this is the city that is also prayed for. It's almost like an idea that you can never achieve it on its own. The idea that it's the city that it's at the level of ideas and not the level of reflection. And any time to embody something is always going to be. This is the problem of the ideas. If the ideas are perfect, they're at this level of theory, at the level of contemplation. They're perfect. They're like this. But when we try to make them in the realm of practice, it's a reflection. This is the whole question of the divided line, right? And that this is always going to be that the realm of the world of material things are always going to be a imperfect reflection of what is true at the level of ideas, and therefore there can never be the justice at this level, or the good at this level is never going to perfectly reflect or perfectly embody what is at here. These reflections are always going to be imitations, and imitations. This is the criticism of poetry, right? So therefore, there is this idea that that poetry, the making of poets, versus the wisdom that's here, is always going to be imperfect in that sense, and therefore the city maker is like a poet in that sense. This is why that famous Shelley, the poets are the ultimate legislators, right? Is true that poets are poesis. What is poesis? Poesis is making, right, in Greek, the making of things. It's the making of things, and that the political community is the making of things, and therefore the legislator is the person who makes the thing, the political thing. Okay, so therefore there is this double sense of this. This is why what Plato's always point is that the made thing is always going to be an imperfect reflection of the real thing, which is the idea. Now Aristotle doesn't buy that. He thinks that that's not true. The real thing is right here because of bodies. We participate in our bodies and our things. Animal nature allows us to achieve this, access what is truly natural in that in the embodiment of what we are. Okay, in the real. So this is therefore we get this question here, right? I mean, that, in other words, just start here. I mean that it is best for the city to be. This is, in other words, this is the next question. He says that it's impossible, and what is not addressed is this issue, right? Which is impossible, in other words. But how should one distinguish in a sense in which it is possible is not discussed? The question of whether it's possible. He says, here he goes, continue, I mean that it is best for the city to be as far as possible entirely one. For this is the basic premise Socrates adopts. In other words, the unity. In other words, it should be wholly, everyone should have the sameness, the oneness. That everyone shares in everything in the sense that they are one. It's a unity. Okay? And yet it is evident that as it becomes increasingly one, it will no longer be a city. For the city is in its nature a sort of aggregation. And it becomes, and as it becomes more a unity, it will be a household instead of a city, and a human being instead of a household. In other words, the more it becomes one. In other words, since the city, as the household is an aggregation of individual actors in there, and the different types of individual actors, and the city is an aggregation of households or causes. Therefore, the more it becomes one, the city will become a household, and then an individual. The more one it is, okay, and therefore, in other words, he says, the more one it becomes, the least like a city it becomes. And actually, this is very interesting because isn't that the basic premise that he's rejecting at the beginning of chapter 1 of book 1? That those who argue that the city, the household, that this the politicos, the words that the master, the despoticos, the master slaves, the oikonomikos, the politicos, and the basileus are all the same thing, and the only thing that differs is the size of the body that's being ruled. Whereas that the master, the despoticos rules a slave, the oikonomikos rules a household, the politicos rules a city, and the basileus rules a ethnoi, or a nation, or an empire, um, a tribe, or an empire in that sense. Um, Aristotle says that's false. That way of thinking is not about size; it's different. That these rules are different in kind, and therefore that's how he. In fact, he reiterates that all through book 1, and he will do that also as we see in also in book 7. So there's something about it, and the logic for why that is so is this unity argument that he says here. It's not a. It's an aggregate. It's not a unit. It's not a union. Now, this is very interesting because this is a direct, in many ways, Aristotle's criticism of Plato will be the criticism of Hobbes, Locke. No. I'm saying this. Will be Aristotle's criticism of uh, Hobbes's, Locke's, Rousseau's, and most of modern thinking about how the city is a collection of union, a collection, a unity of the aggregate members. The idea of the creation of the body politic through the social contract. In other words, the whole modern thinking, starting from Hobbes onwards, about that it's a homogenization and unification through the willing agencies of all the wills coming together to form a united will, and this is what the state or the body politic is to be bodied by. In other words, this is Platonic metaphysics on steroids from Aristotle's point of view. That, in other words, that the nature of political things, a city, is an aggregation of parts, and the second you make it one, you destroy it, as it no longer is what it is, and therefore, wouldn't Hobbes's conception of the social will and the state as a unitary homogenization of a general will make one what Aristotle would argue would be an aggregation of parts and parts in relation to other parts? Okay, this is the whole thing about it, right? Is a city is an aggregation, as polis is an aggregate nature, is in its nature a sort of aggregation, and it becomes too much. When it becomes a unity, it will be a household instead of a city, and a human being rather than a household. For we would surely say that the household is more unity than the city, and the individual is more than that of the household. So even if one weren't able to, and this is why the moderns reduce everything to the individual. This is why the individual is the foundation for Hobbes's and Locke's conception of how the city will be. That the city emerges out of the soul of the individual. Again, this is, but Aristotle did not know, but Aristotle gives a critique. And his critique of Plato is, in fact, a critique of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, Kant, Hegel. Because the same kind of reductionistic thinking is engaged in here. For even if one were able to do this, one ought not to, as it would destroy the city. And by the city, the polis, remember, is to destroy the concept of the political community. It was to destroy politics, in fact. In other words, it would reduce politics to kind of a merely administration in that sense, right? Execution of what is to be done. Now, the city is made up not only in a number of human beings, but also of of those differing in kind. A city does not arise from persons who are similar. In other words, this is interesting. The city is not a strict homogeneous thing. It is a thing of differentiation, a heterogeneity. The political community admits the possibility. In other words, it's not a unity of homogeneity, extreme homogeneity. Rather, it is a. In other words, it is not extreme homogeneity, but it's also not complete differentiation either. There needs to be. In other words, it's an aggregation of different things, different people, different things, who are who are different, but still yet able to share something. There's something in common that holds them together as a community, right? In other words, and he says now that the city is made up not of only a number of human beings, but also of those differing in kind. A city does not rise from persons who are similar. Now this is a city differs from an alliance. This is interesting. A city alliance. This is the problem. What is an alliance? This is going to be one of those things that I'm very much concerned with, because the difference in Latin would be the alliance. It doesn't have the term alliance as. It's the alliance means those that are kind of, it's a treaty between cities. It's like a confederate, alliance are like treaties. Alliances are kind of leagues and things like this. The problem with alliance is that the alliance, he'll discuss this a little later in book three, when he talks about what the city is, what other things, what it's not, and why you could not have an empire, right? And this is, am I jumping ahead? Hold on, let's make sure I'm not wrong. There's something. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm not ahead. Woo. Sorry about that. I think I went back and I kind of lost I kind of lost myself for a second. Um, a city differs from an alliance. Now, alliance is what? These are, he says, the later is useful by its quantity, even in its parts are the same kind, since an alliance exists by nature for mutual assistance. Contract, mutual existence. The alliance comes into existence for mutual existence. This is now. This is where I think there could be the argument. This is what societas is. In Latin, okay, this is the problem of Latin and the Greek. The Latin, there's the term koinonia. No, the Greek is koinonia. How do you translate this in Latin? The traditional Latin is communitas, and Lord has been translating koinonia as community. In his first edition, he called it partnership, but no, this new translation is much better for that. It's community. Um, but we in English think of things that we treat community and society, community and society. We treat that as anyone who followed my Locke discussion on second treatise. Locke treats community and society as synonymous terms, and he goes from one to the other without even thinking about it, thinking that there's no difference between them. But the problem is in the Latin original. This is something that Frederick Tunnis in his The Mineshaft, Gesellschaft, and I have this is the English. This is an English translation to the Cambridge series. It's community and society. It's not civil society. It's community and society. Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, or in Latin, communitas and societas. Societas in Latin is merely the idea of contractual relation. It's the word for businesses and corporations, or treat kind of agreement partnerships between different cities or towns. And that therefore, an alliance is this kind of partnership. It's a partnership that we get into. Therefore, societas meant in Latin a kind of this is something I might write on this. This is interesting because this is the point that this is a very important, and this dealt here. That's even more interesting from that point of view. Is that in chapter 2 about Plato, about the question of unity of that the alliance issue is brought up first, the unity of a city, the kind of what is a city compared to an alliance. In other words, if it's not, in other words, the two popes is a something. It needs to be. In other words, the alliance is very different. They don't share anything in common. He's saying this is, in other words, a city differs from an alliance is therefore different from the idea of the unity. The unity led us to that the city is no longer a city, but it's a household, or more so that, in other words, the greater unity. What's great? The most unity is a single person. Okay, so therefore the city becomes, if it's so unified, it becomes only merely a single person. Now the opposite. that they really don't share. They only minimally share something in common, and this is an alliance, right? Therefore, they have what is in common is the latter is useful by its quantity, its size, its size, its things, even if its parts are the kind. In other words, and since an alliance exists by nature for the mutual assistance, since an alliance exists, it's a mechanism of mutual assistance. I'm helping you, you helping me. I help you, you help me. It's like exchange. You have something I need something you need. So therefore, I help you and you help me. We're mutually benefiting. This is kind of that, and therefore there is in people like Durkheim argues that in trade, society and trade are fundamentally connected. The concept of society that is based on this mutual assistance, right? With the greater, as with a greater weight is added to the scale, as when a greater weight is added to the it's, in other words, that same kind as the greater. In other words, even if that some are the same kind, as when a greater weight is added in the scale, so more in common than this. In this way too, in this sort of way too, a city differs from a nation. Now, nation here is the ethnoi, in other words, the tribe, or that. When the multitude is not scattered in villages, but rather is like the Arcadians. Now, this is note 5. The meaning of the sentence has been much disputed. On Newman Aristotle argument seems to presuppose the distinction between nations, ethne, consisting of simply autonomous villages, and nations consisting of villages subject to some central authority. The relative primitive Arcadians have been organized in a kind of federal state since the foundings of the fortified center of Megalopolis in 362 BC. Aristotle suggests that a state of this sort, a condition, not state as a unity or condition, differs from a city as being merely an alliance of elements, villages, not differing in kind, not really differing in kind. So therefore, this is a very interesting thing, and I think this is worth looking at it some more for my own purposes. I have bigger fish to fry, but I'm doing the revolution now, But this is actually very, because this has been bothering me about the Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft thing. So this has been something I've been. This how does community see? Aristotle's politics is about community, the koinonia, not about alliance. Alliance is, in other words, this is not really political. This is too weak. This is economic. And this is the whole problem with modern political theory, is that it transfers, it moves from the political to the economic, into the rational choice and game theory. In other words, this idea of exchange and trade and voluntary relationships. And it doesn't have the depth. Koinonia has the level of involuntary. Human koinonia and the nature of human relationships involve not merely voluntary relationships, but also involuntary relationships. And this is why the koinonia is very interesting. It's a sharing. It's a sharing that is not, like I said, extreme. It's not to Plato's level of this, we have to share everything and totally. And therefore I think that's how he answers the question, that the nature of a citizen is a sharer, but not in the sharing in nothing is not, it's not possible, but sharing in everything destroys the city, because it's still a differentiation. It's a heterogeneous, not homogeneous construction. And that is very much, the Arcadians is therefore not really political. It's more tribal, and it has this sense. It has still, it's loose, it's structure. It can't, and it's accident. And what holds them together as this stuff is their sameness. And actually, that is perfectly fitting with Durkheim's concept of mechanical solidarity versus organic or organic solidarity. And this is Durkheim's famous book on the theory of division of labor and as the basis of society. what holds the nation together is that each village is the same of every other village. Its homogeneity holds it together. Its sameness holds it together. It's from the kin base, the kins. Again echoing what he said in 1:1 about the connection of villages tied. The village is an extension of the households, the household, the family, the children of the children. Then therefore the village then therefore multiply as different villages because you can't but they're so they don't want to be part of a thing. And what holds them together is the blood bond of the kin bond, the clan or the kin bond structure of things. So all right, I hope this one. Let's see what this does here. No, I'm out of the camera range. I'm out of the camera range. I should go more this way. But okay. So so therefore, let's continue this. He says, from those from whom a unity should arise differ in kind. So unities arise must differ in kind. In other words, they must differ. In other words, unity. In other words, those from whom a unity should arise should differ in kind. So therefore, there is a concept of unity here, but not an excessive unity. Unity must be a product of differentiation. And actually, it makes sense, doesn't it? Even biologically, the idea of human sexual selection operates on the process of difference. The man, the woman, right? Different, not the same. We don't have homosexual reproduction. We have heterosexual reproduction. That is the structure of the nature of evolution. Evolution needs difference, and that the difference creates difference. Our DNA structure is not a sameness. It is the DNA structure is a composite of difference, of different traits and different structures. So in other words, in many ways, the nature of the polis is very much similar to the kind of genetic structure that we see in the DNA, in the sense that it is a composite whole of difference, and therefore this is what I would think is very interesting about this. Right, thus it's in other words, um, it is thus reciprocal equality that preserves city, not pure equality, reciprocal equality. What does reciprocal mean? I I do to you, you do to me. In other words, it's the way we react to each other, and the equality of it is I do something to you, and you do tit for tat strategy, right? This is David Axelrod's kind of idea of talking about in game theory about the way you would play prison dilemma, and how do you eventually become in other words, this is that famous line, the evolution of cooperation, right? Is it David Robert Axelrod? I think Robert Axelrod's classic book, The Evolution of Cooperation, how selfish individuals over time, by interacting with each other, now again for mutual assistance, but then the level of mutual assistance increases to a level of sharing a life together, sharing interests together. In other words, this is a very interesting point that Aristotle's hinting at here. Um, it is the reciprocal equality that preserves cities, as was said earlier in discourses on the ethics. Now, again, 6 here is this is Nicomachean Ethics 11, 32b, 33. Yeah, I just quickly looked. Book 5, Chapter 5 of the Nicomachean Ethics. Okay, this is what is meant by reciprocal. That's where we talk about reciprocal justice, equality. Um, this is necessary. This is necessary the case, even among persons who are free and equal. For all cannot rule at the same time, but each rules for a year or according to some arrangement or period of time. In other words, as even free people and equal people, when they set someone who's going to rule and governing them, they have to make some kind of procedure that one has. In other words, that they can, do this in a sense. That they're going to have cannot rule at the same time. Actually, this is the whole thing about representation, right? This is the whole problem of representation and structures. That this is why you can't have everyone rule. Everyone ruling in a smaller unit, you can maybe do that, but even then, it's probably inefficient. What happens is that as the larger the structure, the city, the body gets, the you couldn't have everyone. It would fall apart. It'd take forever to do it, right? Just think of letting just think of how much time if you gave a group of 20 people 10 minutes each. Okay, that's about how many hours? Let's do that. Give everyone 5 minutes each, say. So 20 people, five. So that's how many hours that would take. Um, but then you had 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. No, so you understand that? Therefore it becomes more difficult if you let everyone have their say and everyone has a kind of role in the process. This is why the structures. This is why we create larger scale bodies need to be representative in order that they, and therefore this is why citizens will appoint people to sit in there to act as the kind of this deliberative entity in that sense. Um, he continues, and in this way, then it results that all rule, just as if shoemakers and carpenters were to exchange places rather than the same person always being shoemakers and carpenters. In other words, they have to change. Sometimes they change their skills, right? This is interesting. That if shoemakers and carpenters were to exchange places rather than the same persons always being so, and that's why the techne doesn't work as the explanation of politics, because in techne your knowledge is only specific here of this, and it's better that the person exercising the techne is the person exercising the techne. Okay, this is interesting that it is this way. Then it results in all rule, that all rule, right? Just as if now he uses examples of shoemakers and carpenters exchange places rather than the same person always being shoe. Now that's kind of an absurd example, but since the condition is better also with respect to the political community, it is clear that it is better if the same always rule where it is possible. In other words, okay, consistency, right? The idea the same should rule. The same people should rule. Why? Because it's consistency. There's consistency. If the different people constantly rule, then everything is changing this way. Isn't that kind of Thucydides' criticism of democratic Athens? That it was always changing its mind about things, and that changing its mind, different people ruling and different things ruling, the policies would be inconsistent and then create chaos, and it's fighting a war. So therefore, he says that, in other words, it is also better with respect to the political community, for it's clear that it is better if the same should always rule, where it is possible. But in cases where it is not possible, because all are equal in their nature. So when their people are unequal in their nature, when there's inequality in their natures and their characters, and there's real differences between people, then this is when there's going to be this that the rulers will be the same. When there's when there's really fundamental inequality in the koinonia, that there are those who are better and more ruling, and the other ones are simply aren't capable of ruling, sharing and rule, and therefore this is why, and it would not be good for them to share and rule because everything would break down. The argument goes, but however, when their natures are the same, right? But when it is not possible because all are equal in their nature, and it is at the same time just for all to have a sharing and ruling, regardless of whether ruling is something good or something mean. In other words, not by mean something not good, not something not that noble. In other words, regardless of the question of whether ruling is good or tedious, right? There is at least an imitation of this. Imitation of this. Now, this is a section 7 note. The text is uncertain at this point. Drenset brackets the sentence following the gloss. None of its variant forms yield a satisfactory sense, but the general idea appears merely to elaborate the remark that the alteration of rule among equals imitates the permanent differentiation of ruler and ruled in societies of unequal. Saunders' translation, but among those among whom it is not possible, since they are all by nature equal, and among whom it is also at the same time just at all should share in the benefit of a chore of ruling, then the principle A that equals should yield place in turn, and B that out of office they should be similar, approximate that practice. So this is Saunders' very analytical breakdown of uh, 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 this text point here. I think I agree. This is the case, right? That there is this kind of idea that it is among those who is not possible. There's going to be, this idea that when people are unequal, there's going to not be a change. But when people are relatively equal, they have to share and rule. In that sense, otherwise it won't work. It will lead to problems. For some rule, and some are ruled in turn, as it becoming other persons, and in a way, among the rulers, different persons hold different offices. So therefore, even among the ruling ones aren't going to be that everyone rules the same thing. They rule different offices. Division of labor, right? The sending of offices lead to a division of labor. Why? It's not going to be a situation where you have to divide the labor up to do this. And therefore, among the rulers, you're going to have the different functions, right? Um, it is evident from these things then that the city is not naturally one in this sense, as some argue. And what is said to be the greatest good for cities actually destroys them. So therefore, the idea that this is interesting. If there's going to be a greater unity, the desire for the greater unity and complete unity, this is the greatest good. This is what would destroy a city. So it is. Repeat this: the city is not naturally one in the sense that some argue, that Plato and others argue. And what is said to be the greatest good for cities, that is, they are as good as, would destroy them. Yet the good of each thing is surely what preserves it. So the good of a thing should be the thing that preserves it. If the good that you say the city should have destroys it, then it's not really the good here. And this is his critique. This is one critique of the Republic. It is evident in another way as well that okay, no, shut down. Ugh, I hate that. Oh, I hit something I shouldn't have hit. Okay. Um, it is evident in another way as well that to seek the unity, to unify the city excessively is not good. For a household is more self sufficient than a person, and a city than a household. And a city tends to come into being. And, again, self sufficient means they're able to live well and to have enough to be able to live well. Okay, an individual is not sufficient in this sense. It needs a household, and the household is a city is allows for the completeness of a household, right? Then a household and a city tends to come into being at the point where the community formed by the multitude is self-sufficient. So the koinonia, in other words, the multitude of different households come together, and that this is the multitude. The multitude, in fact, that's one of those interesting words in Aristotle, the multitude. Translation. Um, this is, we say the many, right? The many, the thing. But the multitude. Yeah, the plethos. The plethos. Again, this is interesting. I'm going to do something here. I hope I doesn't screw it up. No. Go back. I did screw it up. Good on. Sorry, Charlie. Okay, this is the glossary, right? the multitude, the plethos, any aggregation of independent units in association of similar persons is in a political context. This is the idea that the body of citizens, and in particular the majority of citizens or the lower classes, as translated number. It's also translated as number, amount, aggregate, and bulk. Right, the plethos. This is the many. This is the gather, the multitude. This is a very important word because this is the thing that he will describe, that the body. This is what forms the city in that fundamental sense. The multitude. Let's see if I can get this over here. Yes. Um, but the multitude is self-sufficient. The community, the polis comes into being. A city, a polis tends to come into being at the point when the koinonia, the community, formed by the multitude, is self-sufficient, able to be, able to be. I would even go further here. Let's go look at self-sufficient. I'm sorry. Let's. It doesn't hurt to do this. Uh, oh, it's not. He doesn't have the self-sufficient here. This is annoying. Um, Otakus. It's gonna drive me crazy. Well, in the note earlier we held, it was, in other words, it's like having enough. It's not being I'm alone, I can do everything by myself. No, it's I have enough in order to live. Um, the unit itself, and therefore is the more self-sufficient is more choice worthy. What is less a unity is more choice worthy than what is more a unity. Okay, this is interesting. What is, in other words, a complete unity is not is what is less a unity allows for survival in the city. In other words, here the city is differentiation that is able to what it has to come together in order to be sufficient. If it was one, the individual is the least self-sufficient. This household is more self-sufficient. The household is more self-sufficient than mere individual. And the household, the city is more self-sufficient than that. So therefore, if this is, in other words, the household is more of a unity than the city, and the individual is more unity than the household, then this is an irony here. He's playing on the irony that therefore what is less a unity is more choice worthy. The city is more choice worthy than the household. Why? Because it has allowed us to get it allows us to get that Pareto. The city is a Pareto optimality point where of the question of the sufficiency. In other words, that level that allows you to become sufficient, that's able to, in order to live well, to live and to live well, to meet your needs and to meet your needs at a level that you're able to live well, and not engage in, in other words, not just merely survive, but flourish. Um, this is the point of self. What is meant by autarkos? That is, this is what is meant by self sufficiency here, and that this living well, and that therefore it's the polis is this division. The polis brings differentiation together. That alliance somewhat does, but imperfectly. Doesn't give enough binding. We'll see. He will deal with this later in that sense. I think we should stop here. This is where we go here. That this is it ends right here. Of this chapter ends right, and it'll continue next. Continue on the critique of Poland, not Poland. Sorry, critique of Plato's Republic. But it's very interesting in that sense. Um, I forgot how I focus more lately on book 4, 5, and 6. But and I always I also know book 3 very well, and book 7 and 8, and I know 1, but 2 is I've always been this kind of like, you know, never really that much into it because it's always about Plato, Republic. We all know the criticism of Republic. Again, this is sometimes what the thing is. Sometimes we know something so well we don't know it. Um, and even someone who knows been my life doing this book always can find something new here in that sense, or we return to a point of fresh with a fresh sense. So we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, please put them in the comment section, and I will. If I see them, I'll respond. If you've liked what you've seen, like. If you didn't like, say don't why. Criticisms are welcome. Subscribe to continue getting updates here. And if you want to get more, subscribe. Encourage others to subscribe. Share if you like. Share this with someone else. Share it in your social media. Get me some attention, please. And that's the way you grow. Like people sharing it with you. People saying, "Oh, this was pretty good. I liked it." And please tell people you like something from here and share it, please, because it is useful. Um, and that's that. If you want to help contribute, you can become you can follow me on social media. The information below, my links below. If you want to help and help me do something here, to contribute, you can do it through Subscribestar or through Patreon. I'm not that active in that sense. Or if you want to help me directly, one of the ways you can help directly is buy my book, my Lulu book that I made for this. The Lulu book deals with, it's about reading Aristotle's Politics. It deals with, not reading Aristotle, sorry, not reading, this is what we're doing. It's a notebook for Aristotle's Politics, a workbook. And it is a kind of cliff note on Aristotle's Politics, where we go into the various chapters, the books of it, giving specific referencing of ties to this. Now, where did I put my copy? Because I had a copy here. I did it, and then now I don't seem to have it anymore. That's really strange. I had it like in uh, there, and so that's weird. Um, if you want to, this is my copy with paper in it. That's why I didn't want to use it. It's not my clean copy. If you want to do it, you can Subscribestar. You can order through Lulu. That's better because you're getting Amazon and other places, but I make less money. I get less money. If I get a Subscribestar, I get bigger. I get the profit Amazon would have gotten. But I understand that people want the free shipping, so you buy it from Amazon. So, again, um, you can do this book, and this would be useful for those studying Aristotle. It's a guide, getting you through it, going through it one section by section by section. Um, it's kind of a general overview aimed at students reading it and doing like this. It's not a commentary. It doesn't go into due depth regarding interpretations. It's not an interpretation. It offers some kind of, again, it's aimed at students. I'll let you, and then with this, I will let you go. We'll stop here, and we'll see you tomorrow at our continuation of Book 2. Thank you, and have a nice day.